"Get out of my house!" He shouted at the woman he claimed meant nothing to him. But by morning, he was on his knees, begging her not to leave. She agreed to become his fake fiancé for money, never expecting to fall in love with the lie herself. If you love slow-burn fake relationship stories that turn into unforgettable romances, subscribe now. You don't want to miss this one. And if this hook already has you curious, leave a like and stay until the very end. Maya never imagined she'd end up here, standing in the marble foyer of a house larger than her entire childhood neighborhood, waiting to be introduced to a family she was being paid to deceive. The offer had come through a friend of a friend, vague at first, almost too strange to believe. A wealthy family needed someone to pose as their son's fiancé, temporarily, for the sake of his dying grandmother's peace of mind. The pay was more than Maya made in 6 months working 2 jobs just to keep her small apartment and cover her mother's medical bills back home. She'd hesitated only briefly before agreeing, telling herself it was simply a transaction, a role to play, nothing more. Leo had been just as clinical about it during their first meeting, laying out the terms across a glass table in an office as cold and polished as his expression. He hadn't expected, when she walked in, to find himself momentarily distracted. She carried herself with an elegance that seemed almost out of place for someone answering an ad for a temporary fiancé, poised and composed despite the strangeness of the situation. He recovered quickly, keeping his tone businesslike. "My grandmother doesn't have much time left," he said, without any visible emotion. "She wants to see me settled before she goes. This will give her that, without the complication of an actual relationship." "And what happens when she's better? Or when she—" Maya hesitated, unsure how to finish the sentence delicately. "Then the engagement ends quietly," he said. "You'll be compensated fully regardless of how long it takes." It had sounded simple enough. Move in, play the part, collect the money, leave once it was over. Maya told herself repeatedly that it would be easy, that she wouldn't let herself get attached to a family that was never truly hers, to a man who spoke about his own grandmother's death with the detachment of someone discussing a business merger. But the moment she met Halmoni, sitting frail and small in a sunlit reading room, sharp eyes studying Maya with an intensity that made her feel instantly seen, Maya understood this arrangement was going to be far more complicated than she'd prepared herself for. "So you're the one," Halmoni said, her voice thin but steady, eyes moving over Maya with quiet approval. "My grandson has good taste, at least, even if none of this is real." Maya faltered, glancing briefly at Leo, who remained carefully unreadable beside her. I'm happy to be here," she managed. Halmoni studied her a moment longer before a small, knowing smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "We'll see," she said simply, gesturing for Maya to sit beside her. Over the following hour, Halmoni asked question after question. About Maya's family, her childhood, her mother's health, her dreams beyond simply surviving month to month. Questions far more personal than Maya expected from a woman she was supposedly engaged to deceive. Leo sat mostly silent throughout, occasionally answering on Maya's behalf when she hesitated, his tone still carefully composed, though Maya noticed, more than once, the way his eyes lingered on her a moment too long when he thought no one was paying attention, drawn in despite himself by the quiet grace in the way she carried herself. By the end of that first day, Maya had a room in the east wing of the house, a wardrobe far nicer than anything she owned, and an unsettling realization she wasn't ready to admit to herself yet, that despite every warning she'd given herself walking through the front door, some part of her had already begun to hope this fragile, fabricated arrangement might somehow become something real. The days that followed settled into a strange, fragile rhythm. Maya learned quickly how to navigate the unspoken rules of the house. Where to sit at dinner, how to address the staff, the practiced ease Leo's family expected from someone meant to be marrying into it. She played the part well, better than she expected to, slipping into warm smiles and gentle touches on Leo's arm whenever his mother or visiting relatives were watching. What she hadn't expected was how easily those small, practiced touches began to feel less like performance. Leo, for his part, found himself unraveling in ways he refused to examine too closely. He'd built his entire adult life around control. Controlling his family's business, his public image, the careful distance he kept from anyone who might get close enough to see the parts of him he preferred to keep hidden. Maya, without even trying, kept finding cracks in that control. It started small. She caught him one evening in the study long after everyone else had gone to bed, staring blankly at a stack of contracts he wasn't reading. "You should sleep," she said from the doorway, startling him. "I don't sleep much," he admitted, surprising himself with the honesty. "Why not?" He hesitated, and used to being asked, and used to anyone caring enough to ask. "Too much to think about," he said finally. "The company. My grandmother. All of it." Maya crossed the room and sat across from him, still in the simple sweater and slacks she'd changed into for the evening, no performance necessary now that no one else was watching. "You know," she said, "you don't have to carry all of it alone every single second. It's not that simple." "It rarely is," she said. "Doesn't mean you have to do it by yourself." He looked at her for a long moment, something unfamiliar shifting behind his usually guarded expression. It was the first time since she'd arrived that he let himself really look at her, not as the woman playing a role for his grandmother's benefit, but as someone who seemed to see him clearly despite barely knowing him. "Why does it matter to you?" he asked quietly. "This isn't real. You don't owe me concern." Maya considered the question longer than she expected to. "Maybe it doesn't have to be real for me to still care," she said. "I don't know. Maybe I just don't know how to fake everything completely." Neither of them said anything else that night, but something had shifted, subtle and undeniable, settling quietly into the space between them. Over the following weeks, the line between performance and something real blurred further. Halmoni's health, against expectation, began to stabilize. Small improvements at first, then steadier ones, until doctors who had once given somber prognoses started using words like remarkable and recovering. It should have been nothing but good news. For Leo, it became a quiet, creeping panic. The arrangement had been built on an ending. His grandmother's passing, a quiet dissolution of the engagement, Maya moving on with her payment and her life, him returning to the controlled solitude he understood. But with Halmoni recovering, with his mother growing fonder of Maya by the week, with his own feelings tangled in ways he refused to name, the neat ending he'd planned for no longer made sense. He started pulling away without meaning to, shorter conversations, more time locked away in his office, distance where warmth had slowly begun to grow. Maya noticed, though she said nothing, telling herself she'd known from the beginning this was never meant to last, that whatever she'd started feeling was a complication she couldn't afford either. But Halmoni noticed too, sharper and more observant than either of them gave her credit for. "You're avoiding her," she said to Leo one afternoon, catching him alone in the garden. "I'm not avoiding anyone," he said. "I'm busy." Halmoni gave him a look that made him feel, despite being a grown man running a company, exactly like a child caught in a lie. "You forget," she said. "I've known you your entire life. I know exactly what your face looks like when you're falling for someone you're too afraid to admit you're falling for." "This isn't real, Halmoni," he said, though the words felt thinner leaving his mouth than they once had. "You know that." "Do I?" she said simply. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks very real indeed." He didn't respond, though her words followed him long after she'd gone back inside, settling uncomfortably alongside every quiet moment he'd shared with Maya over the past several weeks. Moments that had started to feel far too real for a lie he convinced himself would end painlessly. The tension came to a head on the night of his family's annual charity gala, the kind of event Leo usually endured with practiced detachment, shaking hands, smiling for photographs, disappearing the moment protocol allowed. This year, Maya was expected to attend as his fiancée, and despite the growing distance between them over the past weeks, neither of them could avoid it. When she came down the staircase that evening, Leo forgot, briefly, how to breathe. She wore a deep wine-red gown that moved like water around her. Her hair swept elegantly to one side, simple gold jewelry catching the light with every step. She looked like she belonged in this world far more naturally than he ever felt he did, poised and radiant. And for a moment, the careful distance he'd been building for weeks collapsed entirely. "You look," he started, then stopped, unsure how to finish a sentence that felt too honest for the fragile truce between them. "You can say it," Maya said, a small, knowing smile playing at her lips. "I know I look good." He almost laughed, the sound catching him off guard. "You look beautiful," he admitted quietly. "You always do." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or the same unguarded warmth he'd been avoiding for weeks, before she recovered, offering her arm the way they'd rehearsed for every public appearance before this one. "Let's get through tonight," she said. "Then you can go back to avoiding me in peace." The comment landed harder than she intended, guilt flashing briefly across Leo's face, though he said nothing as they walked out together. The gala unfolded the way these events always did. Polite conversation, calculated introductions, Maya playing her role flawlessly despite the ache sitting quietly beneath her composed smile. It was during a quiet moment on the balcony, away from the crowd, that the fragile control both of them had been holding on to finally began to slip. "You've been distant," Maya said, watching the city lights rather than looking at him directly. "Ever since your grandmother started getting better." Leo didn't deny it. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. This was supposed to end simply. Her health improving wasn't part of the plan. "So what, you're upset she's not dying on schedule?" Maya said, sharper than she intended, immediately regretting the bite in her tone. "That's not what I meant," he said, frustration creeping into his voice now too. "I meant I don't know what happens now. To any of this. To us." The word hung between them, unfamiliar and heavy. "There is no us," Maya said quietly, though the words tasted like a lie even as she said them. "This was never supposed to be real, wasn't it?" Leo asked, stepping closer despite himself. "Because it doesn't feel like nothing to me anymore." For a moment, neither of them moved, the noise of the gala fading into something distant and unimportant. But before either of them could say anything further, one of Leo's board members interrupted, pulling him away for an urgent conversation about a business matter that couldn't wait. Leaving Maya standing alone on the balcony, the unfinished moment settling heavily in her chest. He didn't return to her side for the rest of the night. By the time they got home, exhaustion and unspoken tension had curdled into something closer to resentment. Maya went straight up to her room without a word, and Leo, drowning in guilt and frustration he didn't know how to name, followed her up the stairs instead of letting her go. "We need to talk about this," he said, catching her door before she could close it. "There's nothing to talk about," Maya said, refusing to look at him fully, afraid of what her face might reveal if she did. "You made it clear tonight this isn't real. I understood the assignment from the beginning. I don't know why it's suddenly so hard for you." "Because it stopped feeling like an assignment months ago," he snapped, frustration boiling over in a way he immediately regretted. "And I don't know what to do with that." "So what? You punish me for it instead?" Maya shot back, years of exhaustion and guardedness rising to the surface all at once. "You've spent weeks pulling away from me like I did something wrong, when all I did was exactly what you asked me to do." The argument spiraled quickly, both of them saying things shaped more by fear than truth, until Leo, cornered by feelings he'd spent his entire life avoiding, said the one thing he could never take back. "Maybe this was a mistake," he said, voice cold in a way Maya hadn't heard directed at her since the very first day they'd met. "Maybe you should just go." The words landed like a slap of their own. Maya stared at him for a long moment, hurt flashing behind her eyes before hardening into something colder, more guarded. "Fine," she said quietly. "I'll pack tonight." He didn't stop her. Before that night ever came, there had been other nights, quieter ones, easy to overlook in hindsight, but the kind that had built, brick by brick, into everything neither of them was ready to admit. There had been the evening weeks earlier when a sudden rainstorm trapped them both in the garden gazebo, laughing as they ran for cover. Soaked and breathless, Leo instinctively reaching for her hand to pull her beneath the shelter before either of them realized he hadn't let go once they were safely dry. There had been the afternoon he taught her to make his grandmother's favorite tea, standing close behind her at the counter, guiding her hands over the proper pour, his voice low near her ear, neither of them in any hurry to step apart once the lesson had clearly finished. There had been the night Halmoni asked them to dance together at a small family gathering. For practice, she'd claimed, though the knowing look in her eyes suggested otherwise. Leo had pulled Maya close, one hand at her waist, the other laced gently through hers, and for 3 slow minutes neither of them spoke, simply swaying together as though the rest of the world outside that room didn't exist. When the song ended, he hadn't let go right away, his forehead resting lightly against hers, both of them breathing the same unspoken question neither was brave enough to ask aloud yet. And there had been one evening on the balcony, weeks before the gala, stars scattered above the city skyline, when he'd finally leaned in and kissed her. Soft, hesitant, questioning, and she'd kissed him back without a single second of hesitation, her hands finding the front of his shirt, pulling him closer instead of pushing away. It hadn't been planned, hadn't been part of any arrangement, and for the first time since she'd arrived, neither of them tried to explain it away as pretend. Which was exactly why, weeks later, standing in the doorway of her room and telling her to leave, felt like such a violent betrayal of everything quietly built between them. Maya packed through the night, moving numbly, refusing to let the tears gathering in her eyes fall until she was fully alone. She kept replaying the gazebo, the tea lesson, the dance, the kiss beneath the stars, proof, she thought bitterly, that she should have known better than to believe any of it meant as much to him as it had to her. By early morning, her bags sat by the door. A car already called to take her back to the small apartment she'd almost forgotten was still hers. Leo hadn't slept at all. He sat alone in the study long after their argument, replaying his own words with a clarity that made him sick to his stomach. He thought of the rain-soaked gazebo, her laughter echoing off the wooden beams. He thought of her hands beneath his at the counter, patient and warm. He thought of the way she'd felt in his arms during that unplanned dance, the way kissing her beneath the stars had felt less like a mistake and more like the first honest thing he'd done in years. By the time the sun rose, he understood, with a clarity that terrified him, that letting her walk out that door would be the greatest mistake of his entire life. He found her in the foyer, exactly where it had all begun months earlier, standing beside her bags, waiting quietly for the car that hadn't yet arrived. "Don't go," he said, voice raw, none of the composure he usually wore anywhere in sight. Maya turned, exhaustion and hurt clear across her face. "You told me to leave." "I was wrong," he said, closing the distance between them. "I was scared, and I said something unforgivable, and I understand if you don't want to hear anything I have to say right now. But I need you to know none of this was pretend for me. Not the rain, not the tea, not the dance, not the kiss beneath the stars." He reached for her hand, relief flooding through him when she didn't immediately pull away. "I love you, Maya. Not the version of you I hired. You. And I don't want you to walk out that door because I was too much of a coward to say that until it almost cost me everything." Maya stared at him, months of guardedness and fear warring with everything she'd felt building quietly beneath the surface since the very first week. "You can't just say that and expect." "I know," he said softly. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right now. I'm asking you to stay. Let me actually earn this. Properly, this time. No arrangement. No contract. Just us." For a long moment, she said nothing, searching his face for any trace of the coldness he'd worn the night before. She found none of it. Only quiet, honest fear, the kind she recognized because she'd been carrying the same thing for weeks. Slowly, she stepped closer, closing the last of the distance between them. "You have a lot of making up to do," she said softly. I know, he said. I intend to. He reached up, gently cupping her face the way he had that night beneath the stars, and kissed her. Slow, certain, apologetic, and hopeful all at once. Maya melted into it, her hand curling into the front of his shirt, pulling him closer instead of pushing away, exactly like she had the very first time. When they finally parted, foreheads resting together, Maya let out a soft, disbelieving laugh. You do realize how Moni is never going to let either of us live this down. Leo smiled, a real, unguarded smile that reached his eyes fully for the first time in weeks. Honestly, he said, I think she'd say she called it from the very beginning.